afterwards, like, her daughter was in tears, and she said that is the most animated I have seen her in weeks or months. And I just thought, you know, fair play to him. He's come down here and he's had that effect on somebody, and it's made a real difference to their lives. So,
is it a horrible question we don't ask to just insert here? When you were talking about that and talking about Edward Windy's plastic pinion, I just don't think I've ever seen Prince Andrew, even when he was a working royal, do that kind of stuff. Did he ever do?
Not
you know,
really.
He could have done with a bit of that, couldn't he?
Yeah. I mean, I was really impressed with Edward. He was a lot more human and approachable that I think even I, covering the royal family so many years, had realised, really spending time with him. And I've done a few days like that with Andrew, but it was more, he liked to be the kind of the person directing things and the kind of the thick of it, and the, you know, doing the trade ambassador role and telling people how wonderful he is and what advice they should take. I mean, no, he did do some good work as well. That's maybe slightly unfair of me, but it was in a very different way from Edward and Sophie, I have to say.
And speaking of that, Charlotte, that shy, retiring wallflower of a journalist, Tina Brown, very well-connected journalist, has written something else this week that might link to this. What's she been saying?
Yes, she's written in her Substack that Clive Alderton might be looking to retire. And Clive Alderton is famously the WASP. He's the principal private secretary to the King. And he is very much the sort of guard against all bad things that might happen to King Charles, including interactions with Prince Harry. And Prince Harry has said how he loathes this man, the Wasp, and that he said rude things about him in his book, calling Clive weedy, saying, you know, I'd speak to him and he'd be so weedy, I'd think that nothing negative could come from this conversation, but then his waspy sting would come and sting me later. So he's got a bit of a bad reputation with Harry, and some say that part of Harry's problem with accessing his father and speaking to his father, visiting his father at the moment, is down to Clive being very protective. So if it's true what Tina says, that Clive is leaving, then it might mean there's a way back in for Prince Harry.
What do you make of this, Rebecca? Now, obviously, Clive Alderton is clearly very important, but is he actually the kingpin, like the main block between Harry and Charles?
Well, I mean, all of the private secretaries are the person that most has their principal's ear. And so when it comes to the monarch, that is a very important position. And so Clive has kind of held that position for several decades in and out. He's left briefly to go off and be an ambassador in Morocco, but he's come back. So they do hold a lot of clout within the court. The one thing I would say, though, is that ultimately they still... the monarch is still the boss, and you know, the decision lies with them. And I like to think that they kind of appoint people, you know, perhaps who have the same thinking as him. So he has a lot of influence, the king, of no doubt that is true. But ultimately, you know, the king is, I think, of the same opinion as Sir Clive is. And don't forget, these people are not expendable. I mean, Queen Elizabeth effectively sacked her private secretary, Christopher Gite, who served her loyally for many decades. And actually, a lot of people I know think that was probably one of her very rare errors in the way her court operated, because he was a very safe pair of hands. And the trouble is, when it comes to Harry, he's not very good at accepting his own culpability, I don't think. And I understand the court must be a very difficult place to navigate, especially when you're at the heart of it. But I think it's very easy for him to build people like this up as the bogeymen, stopping him doing what he wants, when actually some of what he has done has you know, they've been almost saving him from himself sometimes over the years. So
it's interesting. Other problematic royals, despite the so-called siege of Royal Lodge, apparently Andrew is still expected at Sandringham for Christmas this year. What kind of scenes are we going to be seeing that?
I mean, look, I'll be honest, I haven't asked anyone of late because we're still in November. It wouldn't surprise me if they are there, because they do tend to stick to the family traditions, although in recent years Andrew and his family have been given Wood Farm to stay in, you know, Queen Elizabeth's and Prince Philip's old property. So they haven't been under the same roof as the King and, you know, Princess Anne and Prince Edward and others. But gosh, can you imagine? It'd be
what is
pretty
that
awkward this year.
festive lunch chat going to be like?
Yeah.
Housing arrangements? What on earth would they talk about?
I strongly suspect there's a lot of things that they won't talk about. So they'll stick to the weather, children, the latest shooting, you know, what the state of the pheasants and everything are like. But no, I think they'll definitely avoid those serious things. I mean, we know that they tend to deal with the serious stuff sort of through their officials. And, you know, if it was raised, I'm sure the King would say, oh, look, that's one for, you know, Sir Clive or whatever.
Well, it's true. Can I say, I've been to the odd aristocratic lunch party.
Why are we not surprised?
It never fails to amaze me how they can be at war on, say, a WhatsApp group or in their social lives. And then when they come together at lunch, it's like nothing has ever happened. Their amazing British stiff upper lip ability to just sort of not address the elephant in the room and just talk about the tea and the weather. I mean, it is true. I know it's an old trope, but it is actually true that I can just imagine them sitting down and having a very civilised lunch, even if they're seething behind the scenes.
Amazing. Well, speaking of turkey, we would love to wish all our American viewers a very happy Thanksgiving. And Charlotte, speaking of the Yorks, there was an interesting story about the princesses in Hello magazine this week.
Yes, Hello magazine revealed that Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie have been taking it in turns to visit their father at Royal Lodge. And the implication being that he's really in the doldrums. He's more or less sitting on his own, can't bear to leave the house, occasionally goes riding, doesn't have much of a social life. And so they've taken on this very sort of parental nurturing role and they're taking care of their father. And I have to say, it kind of rings true because I keep hearing things about how he's very reluctant to leave the house, more or less. I mean, I don't want to say agoraphobic because I think that's pushing it too far, but and who can blame him in some ways because he's had this terrible siege of Royal Lodge going on around him. He probably doesn't dare leave the place in case they lock the doors behind him. But, you know...
jokes aside, do you think it is really getting that dramatic on that front?
Well, I think possibly everything he's ever known has been stripped away from him. You know, this is a man who lived by his bombastic ability to appear at a dinner party and sort of show off about who he knows and how fabulous he is. That's his identity, and for wrong or right, that was who he was. He was, I have to say, a bit of an egotist by all accounts. And so imagine that's all gone. So he's just a bit of a reduced individual by the sounds of things. And, you know, and who can blame Beatrice, who's very protective over her father, particularly, even more than Eugenie. And I think they're quite worried about him. And so they're taking it in turns to visit him, like he's at an old people's home or something. Oh. I know. Are we feeling sorry for Prince Andrew?
Yeah,
I just made
maybe a little bit right now, yes. Let's talk about Donald Trump, Richard. He made another appearance in your column this week for a royal-related reason.
Yes, you might recall that our fellow Mail columnist Craig Brown, in a biography that he wrote about Queen Elizabeth, he said that she had described Donald Trump as very rude. Now that took us all aback, and we've discussed it on this programme before because they seemed to get on okay. We know that they spent quite a lot of time with each other. So it wasn't clear what had happened. But anyway, it was told by a very good source what it actually was, and it was true. That she had said that, and the reason was that the president-elect, as he now is, had made a comment about, he said, I'm sorry about your difficult sister. He described Princess Margaret as difficult. And that had really upset the Queen because it's just very presumptuous, and it just, you know, she's always been very defensive. She was always very defensive of her sister. Yeah. And she would not like strangers, essentially, commenting on close family.
Well, it's that classic family thing, isn't it? I can say what I want about my family, but you can't.
Yeah, and I did sort of wonder why, like, he might have said something like that. But I think the thing is, you know, people are often very nervous when they met the Queen, probably looking for small talk. And I think it is possible that he might have been watching The Crown as he prepared for his visit to Britain. Because before he came, they'd had 2 series, and Princess Margaret featured very heavily because it was all about her desire to marry Captain Peter Townsend.
But that's why I'm confused about this, because she'd long since passed away. So, yeah.
Which I think Richard's theory makes sense. And one day I'll tell you, maybe if we do a Christmas programme, I might tell you the really daft thing I said to the Queen once. So I can know...
That is quite the tease.
First time ever I met her. So I can actually have sympathy that you're struggling to think of how to strike up a conversation, and you say something and you think, why did I say that?
I remember being due to meet the Queen at a party, sort of came over, and then I actually just quietly withdrew because I didn't trust myself not to say something inappropriate.
So I relate to that.
Lost for words.
Yeah. So I don't think anyone would hold it against Donald Trump necessarily, but it was a bit of an awkward comment to me.
Oh my gosh. Well, Charlotte, another royal friend, former England rugby player James Haskell, has made some interesting remarks about the family. What's he said?
Yes, well, speaking of blurting things out, he just blurted out that he thinks the royal family is dysfunctional. And I love rugby players because they do make gaffes. They're not kind of PR trained.
Well, it's not exactly, I mean, I think it's a fair comment.
Yeah, it's a fair comment, but that's what's so great. Like, it's real talk, and he's saying what we all think, which is actually they're just a family like anyone else, and they're a bit dysfunctional. He was actually defending the royal family. He also said some family members are better than others, and I think he's alluding to Prince Andrew because later in the same interview, he says that at Mike Tyndall's wedding, he made a really inappropriate joke about Prince Andrew sweating, and I better not repeat it because it's quite crass. But he said that, at a royal, essentially Zara's wedding, it's a royal wedding. He made a really bad, rude joke about Prince Andrew. So when he says they're a bit dysfunctional and some are better than others, I think he's alluding to Prince Andrew and not Prince Harry, who I guess would be the other black sheep, because he went to Prince Harry's wedding and he's friends with them. But yeah, so James Haskell knows that he's much more in with the royal family than I actually quite realised, to be honest.
Well, it obviously wasn't held against him.
Well, I was going to ask.
Yeah, he went to Windsor Castle for that podcast with William, Catherine, Princess Anne that we saw.
The royal family love rugby players. I mean, Mike Tyndall is one, and I think he's obviously friends with James Haskell. I think they kind of forgive them there.
Yeah, if you're a rugby player, you can probably get away with a bit
kind of
more
jocks,
than others might.
Aren't they? They get away with it. It's bands. It's bands. It's like lager drinking banter, and that's the royal family sense of humour in most cases.
Hate the word bands.
I know, so do I. I'm really sorry, I don't know why I said that.
Anyway, hey, can you hear that? It is time for our Unsung Royal Hero of the Week. Richard, who have you got for us?
Well, I'd like to nominate Sophie Winkleman. She's a former actress. No, well, she still is an actress, actually, and a very good one. Best known in Britain for her role in the comedy Peep Show.
And Claudia's half-sister.
Yes, and she's married to a royal, is Lord Frederick Windsor, who's the son of Prince and Princess Michael of Kent. Anyway, she's always, she's light-hearted comments she makes, and she does a lot of work for charity, but she gave an interview this week in which she talked about marrying into the royal family. And actually, just like Mike Tyndall, she made the point that they couldn't have been nicer and more friendly and more welcoming. So they do stand in contrast to comments from another former actress.
They've been married a long time, haven't they?
Yeah, they have, They've got children, and we will be seeing her on Christmas Eve because she's due to attend Catherine's carol service at Westminster Abbey.
Lovely. Well, thank you for that. Now, to one of our Palace Confidential heroes now. And yesterday we heard the very sad news that Liz Hatton had died. You might remember her as the 17-year-old photographer and cancer patient who met the Prince and Princess of Wales. And she came onto Palace Confidential to talk so movingly about it with Rebecca English. Now, William and Catherine have released a statement about her saying, "We are so sorry to hear that Liz Hatton has sadly passed away. It was an honour to have met such a brave and humble young woman. Our thoughts and prayers are with Liz's parents, Vicky and Aaron, and her brother Matteo at this unimaginably difficult time." William and Catherine. Now, Rebecca, it's dreadful news. You got to know her and her family. She made a really big impression for someone so young.
Well, I think I said on the programme last year, she's packed more into her 17 years than most of us will do in our lifetime. And Vicky, Liz's mum, contacted me yesterday just before she was announcing it, just to let people know. And just said, Liz wasn't scared of dying, but she was really scared of leaving her little brother. She was really terrified. That was the only thing that scared her.
Yeah.
And she also just wanted to thank people for all the good wishes that they'd they've given her, because she said that's given them so much, confidence over the last year to do what they've done. And she was also really thankful to the Prince and Princess of Wales for giving them such an amazing opportunity for Liz to complete the bucket list that she wanted to complete. And, she'd already been doing it, but, William and Catherine inviting her in sent her story to stratospheric, really. And she had so many opportunities. I saw her only last week. She did an exhibition in London of her work, and they very kindly invited me to it. And you could tell then that she didn't have long. She'd really gone downhill, and in fact, so much so they were planning to do Christmas this weekend early, so she could celebrate it with Matteo. But sadly, she didn't last that long. But she was on the red carpet at the Royal Variety Show on Friday, snapping away. She was just determined to pack everything she could into every last minute of her life. And
all power to her for that.
We're all very lucky to have met her.
And I know that you will never sing your own praises, but I know how hard you worked to make her last months amazing as well.
No, she was just, her and her family. I mean, they say the worst things happen to the nicest people, but they really didn't deserve that.
Yeah. I mean, obviously our hearts are with Liz's family, as you know. Now, the pictures viewers will have seen there were some of those taken by Liz. There'll be a link to both the show where we interviewed Liz and a fundraiser set up by the family to support research into the type of tumour that she had. Right. Well, I mean, as you know, how do you move on from that? But we will to some more beautiful pictures now. And there has been so much love for Prince William in military garb this week that we decided to dig into the archives and put together some pictures of William looking smart in uniform. Hope you enjoy. And don't go anywhere, as the new episode of Reading the Royals is coming right up. Click here. And for that, just time to thank my guests, Rebecca, Charlotte, Richard, and to you all for watching. We will see you next week. Bye-bye.